Our next presenter is Bob Dunphy.
Good evening. Thank you for having me. I'm delighted for the opportunity to talk about this topic because my colleagues, the fellows at ULI, have been discussing this whole question of changes in metropolitan development patterns over the last half a century or so, and whither the future. So it's a wonderful opportunity to discuss it with you. And where I'm going to talk about a little bit about. First of all, I'm going to try to compress this to meet our time guidelines and beat the Mormon Tabernacle Choir behind me. It's a nice touch. Where we've been, some of the challenges ahead, developer responses to housing, the development of the future, and the public response. Beginning with the notion of the American dream was nicely captured, I think, particularly in a traffic sense by Anthony Downs of Brookings, who said that there are four pillars of the American dream. It includes living in a nice single-family home in the suburbs, having a job in the suburbs, typically in a well-landscaped office park, being able to drive to work with free parking, and having a local government, a small local government that can protect your property values. From all of those, I can have an amen there. And largely, we've succeeded, I've got to say. It's really astounding. If you take a proper look back in terms of housing rates at record levels, in terms of availability of jobs and shopping, and even mobility. If you take a long view of mobility, the levels of car ownership, the extraordinary development of the highway system, people's availability to move around, notwithstanding some of the more recent issues with traffic congestion. And transit. We're talking a lot about transit. Really, transit used to be mostly a private venture that changed dramatically over this period, and probably beginning in the 70s or so, we've begun to see some substantial investments in transit in many places, and certainly here in the Twin Cities. And this happened really not by accident, but actually with a direct intervention of the public through a number of financial and regulatory approaches, through mortgages for VA and FHA, through HUD subdivision controls, and of course the interstate highway system. But it is a new day, and we have quite a different looking future. We continue to have rapid growth and demographic shifts. The infrastructure picture is going to be a whole lot muddier than it's been in the past. Challenges to the quality of life and greater dispersed leadership in most regions. It used to be that you could kind of get all the old boys together in an old boys club somewhere downtown and cut deals. Well, all of the leaders are not old boys anymore, and you'll never get them downtown. Population growth. The U.S. expects to add another 60 million people or so by the year 2025. We're actually one of the fastest growing countries among the nations. And major shifts in growth today over 70% of the households do not have children under 18. There is a strong population of young professionals, and as well as aging baby boomers and immigrants that are fueling this extraordinary growth, and particularly housing. From a transportation perspective, some of the changes I think we're going to see are to emphasize choice over dealing with congestion, to take a much more realistic approach to transit investments, and to really introduce pricing as an important part of the element that's fairly new. From a development perspective, there really are two kind of major paths here. One is to revitalize the core and the close-in suburbs, and the other is to build better at the edges. And there probably is some constituency out there which says, from a smart growth perspective, better we should have all of the growth in the core and the inner suburbs and just not build on the fringe. Well, I guess our consensus is that's not possible. It's certainly not realistic. So we've got to do both. The role of public facilities is critical in understanding and making these responsive to consumer choices, connecting to transportation impacts, influencing eventually developer decisions, and working out the finance. big question that one faces with smart growth or new urbanism or whatever you call it, the notion of a different kind of pattern, a more urban pattern, is how big is there a market for it, and will I just build a project and nobody will buy it? I'm going to suggest that maybe based on very little theory, that market could be as much as a third of the growth in housing. And a good example here, I think, of recent strong support for in-town living of central area population growth has been very rapid in places, traditional places like Chicago and Seattle, but in other kind of non-traditional places like Denver and Atlanta. People like living downtown. Okay. I missed a slide here that looks at the consumer decisions on housing. This is a survey that was done by the home builders and the realtors. Top three factors: price is an overwhelming factor in why people choose their home. Number two is neighborhood, and way down the list is proximity to work. So we're going to come back to that. The cost of transportation, it's important to, I know this group probably appreciates that, it counts for about $8,000 a year per household. Most of that's on driving to keep two cars on the road. Extraordinary level funding. And if you look at the big picture, though, and that is the big picture, that it's consumer spending on transportation. An estimate was made for the Twin Cities area a number of years ago that figured that the public spend about $2.5 billion a year to manage and expand the transportation system. The consumers, the users, spent another $23 billion. So these are big dollars. This shows costs of some of the different modes, and I guess the interesting finding here is that the cost of driving, solo driving, is actually cheaper. This is kind of national figures than the bus, if you include all the figures. It's about equivalent to heavy rail. Okay, one of the challenges that I have in dealing with congestion as a source of investment is, despite the Texas Transportation Institute, you probably have all seen the latest reports about how congestion is bad and getting worse. If you try to dig into that and try to get some response of that, really what counts is not the congestion, it's the consumer and it's the traveler, how people respond to it. The bottom line is people are finding a way to get through it somehow. ABC News did a feature earlier this spring and commissioned a survey of travelers, and they asked an interesting question. They asked how people like their commutes. I mean, the typical transportation survey asked how long it is, how fast it is, da-da-da. They never asked if you like your commute. Well, surprise, 60% of the people said they were happy in their commute because it's independent, they're away from the kids and the job, and who knows. Some of the other national averages, we have the census reports that the average commute time in America in the year 2000 was about 25 minutes. Same ABC News poll found, they said it was about 19 minutes. They probably more of them lie than lie to the census. The one possible glitch in here was that they said, well, what's your worst commute? And they said, well, on average it's 19 minutes, but some days it's just so horrible it can be 46 minutes. So it's this reliability that's a concern. I think I've mentioned travel choices. They need to be built in, not added on later. That's a major problem with retrofitting existing development patterns. Walking is the second best mode. Actually, in some respects, maybe it's the best mode. It's the second most popular mode, and we need to do a better job of accommodating walking. It's not complicated. Developers know how to do it. You create the right patterns, the right mix of uses, close enough that if somebody's going from point A to point B, and it's, say, a half a mile or so, they'll walk. I mean, it's not an issue. Transit needs to have supporting patterns. In too many places, we build the transit after the fact to fit an existing pattern. And even cars work better with there's some options in the suburbs. Often we don't have the connections that we need to link up subdivisions to community facilities to local retailing. Everybody has to get out on the main road. So even if you're in your car, there are better ways to go about doing that. This is an example of the kind of one-stop shopping that you can get with a pedestrian-oriented business center. On the left is Bethesda, Maryland, which is a good example of a place where there are lots of stores and services around. If you're there, park the car, and the norm is to walk to lunch and walk to shop and so forth. Up the road a bit, a highway-oriented office park, and the norm there is get in your car and drive to lunch, which is not only a congestion problem, but it's a quality of life thing. It's sort of a pain to do that. It's much more appealing to have the other option. Transit lines are expensive. I guess I don't need to tell this crowd that. These are some, my measure is the investment per daily regular rider. And a quote there from the governor of Nevada when the line opened in Las Vegas, that projects like this always straddle a thin line of success and failure. This is kind of eerie because it looked like it was a no-brainer, and then things started falling off the train. Making the case for transit is two parts. First of all, you need to make the case that transit will work here for people like me, your average voter, not your average transit user, because most people do not use transit. And then, and even more important, is to make the case that transit supportive development will work here in order to support the transit. Now, from a urban development perspective, Mr. Bellis point about the efficiency of urban patterns. I'm going to talk a little bit about urban and suburban, and point out that from a transportation perspective, urban is ideal because it has a number of these qualities. People are likely to ride transit because it's well served and they're close by. There are alternatives to driving for those who are driving averse, and for those who continue to drive in these urban settings, which is probably the majority of the people. It's a short drive. So congestion is not quite as much of an issue. And you have shared parking. And even in Dallas, we see that the folks that live close in town drive less than the folks that live further out in the suburbs. From a development perspective, from a developer perspective, however, things change. These projects, trying to develop in urban areas, is very problematical. They're complicated projects. They take longer to build. They're more expensive. They're riskier. You may not even be sure if there's a market there. And developers report considerable amount of brain damage on getting involved in projects like this. This is a project, this is Block 37 in Chicago, which has sat there since I think the 1990s or so when the city got it. And it's near the Loop. It's an ideal location. They just haven't been able to come up with a development pattern. Lindbergh Station in Atlanta was considered a poster child for transit-oriented development. They advertised for developers. They came up with a good plan, and the developer went off and started to develop and find out that neither the city nor the transit agency had actually gotten the buy-in of the community. So they spent a considerable amount of time butting heads with the neighbors who didn't want any of this kind of development. Different pattern in the suburbs. Transportation is very problematical. You have fears of congestion, whether they're rightly placed or not. You have patterns of low density, disconnected sidewalks, and hostile attitudes, and no support really for roads to build further out into the suburbs, amongst politically speaking. From a development perspective, of course, the suburbs are ideal. That's where all the growth is. That's where the opportunities are. That's where the cheap land is. And the challenge is to create a different kind of development pattern than has often been done in the past. Better, I think you've seen some of those today. So what developers are doing more infill, responding to higher land prices with higher density in response to the market, creating places instead of building projects, master planning communities, I think you saw some of those, and reconnecting retail. Creating places and mixed use. This came out in the ULI Emerging Trends Survey as the highest ranked land use, the highest ranked product for both for investment and for development. So developers are very interested in this. These projects are happening both close in and far out. They're a little bit more difficult to do, so it requires a little bit more sophistication. Housing is often an important part of it. The retailers are still a bit cautious until they see the results from the success of some of the shops here. The new types of commercial centers are emerging as mall alternatives, and even some of the malls are creating Main Street kind of settings. Meisner Park is in South Florida. This was a center that was redone into a really stunningly successful center, is recently adding housing, which builds in the market base for your product. Housing, I mentioned housing, they're growing concern about the income gap in America. Even now the rich are, even the rich are falling behind the hyper-rich. The response is often to drive until you qualify. And the National Housing Commission did a report recently that found that low to moderate income families spend 70 cents less on transportation for each dollar more they spend on housing. Except it usually goes the other way around. They're spending more to drive and saving on housing. So that kind of gets us back to development on the fringe, which is probably going to be the focus of most of the affordable housing. You need to assure that you have a range of housing choices, and you build in these kind of connections, walkable communities, transit-ready development with multiple connections, as I said, not just kind of one way in and out. Affordable housing is a considerable concern, and workforce housing, that is not low-income subsidized housing, but something for people who have jobs and to find a way to develop a housing product for them. Some of the ideas are to redo building codes to make them more responsible and more efficient, expediting permits, green taping, inclusionary zoning, housing trust funds. So the public strategies are how to pull this all together and orchestrate it. Very difficult problem in most regions. We hear in Twin Cities you have 7 counties and 189 government municipalities. Chicago has over almost 1,500 localities. Somebody from the Bay Area pointed out that the people paid to implement plans aren't paid to imagine the future of the entire region. Their job is to look out for their own community. So that's one of the approaches is to look more toward public-private partnerships to do this. Business improvement districts where the business owners agree to tax themselves to provide the services that they need to be successful, that the localities are not able to do. Tax increment financing. I looked at the Bloomington Central Station project today. Seems like a terrific example of tax increment financing, a very complicated project that looks like it has great success. Regional visioning, there are a number of these exercises going around. Looking at the big picture, this is from South Florida, that look back to before Disney and after Disney, where it was a whole different world, and to engage just not the usual suspects who talk about planning issues. Bring in addition to the elected officials, bring in the business leaders and the civic leadership. So some of the policy ideas are strong state and regional planning and zoning. This may be sort of contrary to some views, but it's particularly when it comes to designating major regional commercial centers. These are region-shaping centers. They need to be a decision on the part of everybody. Fair share, affordable housing linked to public funding of infrastructure, and transportation investments a part of a regional growth strategy. We have perhaps the opportunity to make it easier to do development in the urban and inner suburban areas and more difficult in the suburban areas. And that would have the advantage of tilting the balance maybe a little bit and creating better projects in the suburbs. And last, on the regional governance, there is no transportation solution without a land use solution. A regional view is in the best interest of all of the localities, and I think it's important to get them all to understand that. In fact, one of the problems that we have today is that the debates that go on typically are in a metropolitan planning organization, which consists of local governments on a voluntary basis. Land use is so sensitive, very few of them ever wish to take that on. So what we may need to do is to create kind of a non-federally supported MPO for the sake of truly engaging all of the localities to face these important questions of growth and transportation. So I'll close with a quote from a great humorist and son of Minnesota, Garrison Keillor. He never realized in all those years of working for the Highway Department that democracy was a contact sport. Thank you.